Welcome everyone. This is the first in TERN's bi-monthly seminar series, which we're calling Ecosystem Observation. And as you can see from the slide, we have a great title for today's talk. Let me get my head around the technology here. So to start today, and in keeping with the spirit of reconciliation, I acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where UQ now stands and recognise that these have always been places of teaching and learning. Given that this is a webinar and we're all in different places, I also acknowledge the traditional owners where each of us are present today. I pay respect to elders past and present and emerging, and acknowledge the important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islands people continue to play within our community. Again, thanks to all of you for joining us today. I know for some of those that you haven't met me, my name's Beryl Morris, and I'm Director of TERN, Australia's Ecosystem Observatory. I do have apologies from Paul Lawrence from the Department of Environment and Science in Queensland, for those who don't know him, and I'd like to make special mention of Professor Lynn Beasley, AO, who is Chair of the TERN Board and has joined us today. Now, some practicalities of running the webinar today. We can't see or hear any of you as attendees, and I understand that there's something like that, 115 or more of you today. We will take questions through the Q&A box. It's at the bottom of your Zoom window where you'll see the Q&A button, and if you click on that, you can type in a question. Feel free to type your question in at any time during the seminar, but we will only be answering the questions at the end. We are recording this webinar today so that we can share it with those who can't attend afterwards, or for those that want to have another revisit when you finish today. Just to note, if you're in full screen, you'll only see the PowerPoint presentation. If you exit full screen, you'll see the speakers as well as the PowerPoint. I mentioned that this is our inaugural seminar in our bi-monthly series, and we will be holding more through the year. I'll tell you more about that at the end. TERN, of course, is a national ecosystem observatory. We're funded or enabled through the Australian government through the INCRIS funding program, and we have a significant contribution of funding from the Queensland government and some of the other state governments. Today is primarily part of a program that we're running with the Queensland government, but I just like to acknowledge the Australian government, New South Wales government and South Australian government for their contributions to TERN as well. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Just to tell you a little bit more about the panellists. We're going to have the scene set by Professor Stuart Phinn, who's from the University of Queensland, where he runs the Joint Remote Sensing Research Program, and he's part of Earth Observation Australia. And I'm going to let Stuart do all the other introductions and about himself, because I think we all just want to get into our talk today. So I'm going to hand it over to Stuart now. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks very much, Beryl. Thanks to Beryl and TERN Board and everyone for the opportunity to talk today, and also to Alexis and Peter for also sitting in on the panel. So Beryl's mentioned the title briefly. It is about research infrastructure, but sort of how it fits into a bigger picture, particularly in relation to environmental monitoring. I do want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting today, and which TERN has research infrastructure on across the country, and acknowledge that's a critical part of what we're doing, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. Okay, I did start with that title, and then I thought about it a bit more after we went through sort of what we were going to talk about today, and I've added community in there as well. I'll come back to that as well. So just in terms of introducing the panellists, so we have Peter Scarth. So Peter is based at the University of Queensland and Queensland Government in the Joint Remote Sensing Research Program, working across government and research applications. He's also had increasing involvement in private industry in the two companies that I've mentioned there as well. Alexis McIntyre. Alexis is at the moment Acting Director for Spatial Enablement in the Geospatial and Information Analytics branch in what's now Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment. The reason I asked Peter and Alexis to be part of this is the development of research infrastructure and how it's used to address science, and then how that science is used to underpin government applications has been a key part of what both of them have been doing for the last 10 plus years. And it's at a state level, a national level, and international level as well. So that's a bit of us today. So the aim of the webinar here is I want to present a point which that first point on the slide came out of reflecting on 10 years of research infrastructure last year. I was fortunate to be the initial director for TERN when it was set up. And then looking back over the last 10 years, it's really become clear that collaborative research infrastructure does have a critical role in linking across all the different, let's say, institutions or mechanisms in our society, and that's government, it's industry and community in all those different areas. So the abstract or the outline for today there is just to explore how research infrastructure has enabled us to take often disparate or disconnected activities, which are sometimes institutionally based, and I've described them as dysfunctional because they're publication driven. Really happy to have discussions with people about that. I don't think we should be doing science just to get publications. That's a waste of government money. We need to be doing science to support, essentially how we live, industry, community, all of those things. Publications are part of it. We'll come back to that a little bit later on. So we're going to talk about those linkages across research in universities, research institutions, research infrastructure, TERN, which is ideally used by research institutions to do activities, make science work and translate it to larger areas and operational applications for use in government and industry and non-government as well. So there's a bit of an overview of what we're going to look at today. We're just in the overview at the moment. I'm going to talk with Peter and Alexis in a minute, ask the audience a question, and then have a little bit more context setting about why are we actually linking research infrastructure to government and industry. Isn't it just about science? We've just come off a 3 to 4 hour meeting that was partly about some of that. So I do want to talk about that and hopefully generate some thoughts, controversial ideas to shift this space, because it's got to move or it's not going to go anywhere over the next couple of years. And then we've got times for questions at the end of it. So just in terms of an overview of where the points here are coming from, the diagram there I think is referred to as TERN's funnel diagram, which is showing what TERN does for those of you that are not familiar with its operations in terms of looking at measurements at site and local scale, going to regional areas, and then continental scale and larger. And it connects the science, the fundamental science together to do that work and get things going. And ideally, it should then go and be used. And that's part of today's discussion. Bias that's going to come into today's discussion is Earth observation. That's the area that Peter and Alexis and I do a lot of work in, and it's collaboration's critical to making it work. Okay, so I just want to go, when I was starting to put this together and think about what could we talk about, I did go back to the 10-year presentation I did last year about how far have we come in research infrastructure, and the concluding set of points I got to are listed here, and I thought they were timely just to reiterate 3 of them that I really want to focus on. So collaborative infrastructure works if we communicate its purpose, process and structure clearly. The second one's my first key point. You've got to engage appropriately in the communities that are doing science, and then the communities that are going to use that science, whether it's government, industry, communities, NGOs. You need professional bodies and long-term plans, whether they're government plans or Academy of Science or Ecological Society of Australia plans. They really need to be directed by that. You need procedures and operations which are transparent and can be found. And for this to be a success, and if you look at some of the other research infrastructure programs and parts of TERN that work or have worked, they do link across the research community into government and also work with industry as well. Second really key point is research infrastructure needs a clear process to start doing things, review process and assess, and decide if it stops or continues. That's really critical. We've got to recognise and plan for technical changes. I think that's something that we're doing really poorly at the moment. Maybe other people have different ideas, but we're just playing catch up to the rest of the world instead of trying to get ahead and get ready to support our society. Bottom line in all of this is infrastructure. Collaborative infrastructure is about building people, careers and capacity. It's not going to work unless they're there. Okay, so where do we sit with collaborative research infrastructure? Well, this is a really simplified version of where Alexis, Peter and I work, particularly down the bottom end here, which is taking image data sets combined with field data and science and turning it into products and services for people to use to make decisions. And collaborative research infrastructure plays a really critical role here, which we'll come to in a minute. TERNs, when it was developed initially, and yes, these are some retro diagrams from when we started TERN. Now, they were about enabling all the scientific communities that are working in different areas to collect information on the ground, in the water, in the air, put it together and make it accessible and available. All of these different programs, which are part of the original sort of version of TERN and which have evolved over time from a selfish Earth observation component, this one, all of those components are really important. We need the information in here to set up and establish models and algorithms that deliver information on vegetation cover, water depth, whether things are being cleared or not, soil properties, water properties. And we need ways of doing that across jurisdictions. Okay. So just to lead into the initial talk with Alexis and Peter, this is out of TERN's strategic plan 2016 to 2025. So we're over halfway, or not quite, no pressure on Beryl and everyone here, over sort of halfway through that. And TERN's meant to be providing data, tools and expertise to state and territory governments, the Commonwealth, research, industry and international. It'd be good to have a really critical look about how well we actually do in all of those areas. Come back to that later. Okay, I just wanted to turn over to Peter and Alexis at the moment. So Peter, particularly from a state government perspective, and Alexis at a Commonwealth perspective, could we just get a brief overview of how you both have used or continue to use research infrastructure in what you actually do? I'll start with Alexis first.
Thanks, Stuart, and thanks for the opportunity to join the panel this afternoon and talk about what is a really important aspect of the work that we do and the work that everyone does to look at how research infrastructure connects through to government and how you can move from the research that's happening within all of the various institutions across Australia and how that gets applied into decision making, from my perspective, primarily for government decision making, but more broadly, how that can actually be applied to real world problems. So my role at the moment is as the Acting Director for Spatial Enablement within the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment. And my role is really about trying to connect the policy and program areas within the department to the sources of information that can underpin evidence-based decision making in those spaces. So I guess I primarily facilitate access, and it's about working with all of the various parts of the environmental information community to try and create robust pipelines that can not only deliver data, but it's also about building collaborative infrastructure that means that all of the data products, but also all of the expertise and also all of the insight into how we can apply that information is brought all the way through to the actual areas that are wanting to access that information to make crucial decisions about how we can protect and conserve matters of national environmental significance in particular. So we do that through working collaboratively with state and territory government and also with research infrastructure and research organisations. An example of how we're doing that at the moment is a project we're starting up on the digital environmental assessment process. And one of the key elements of that particular project is to try and create a series of biodiversity repositories. We're starting work with WA, but hoping that that will eventually extend out to all of the other states and territories. And a crucial part of that is working with TERN to be able to develop the standards for data exchange and being able to integrate all of the information that is collected to support environmental assessment from the proponents and bring that through to decision making at all of the government levels. So that's kind of one example of the sort of work that I do at the moment in terms of, that project's not me personally, but my colleagues, but in terms of accessing research infrastructure, it's really about building those collaborative projects to enable that data flow all the way through to decision making. But as you mentioned, my background is actually as a remote sensing scientist. So I've also had hands-on experience in accessing the NCI and working with others on developing some of the information products themselves from remote sensing. And that's really shown me the value of how research infrastructure has the power to bring together all of the different parts of the community to work together on solving some of the key challenges in being able to develop environmental information, which is fit for purpose and actually feeds into the decision-making process. And without that shared space to be able to work together and develop the right types of information, a lot of the time, the value of all of the work that happens in developing environmental information doesn't get to be leveraged to the extent that it should. So that's kind of my involvement in research infrastructure and accessing research infrastructure, and why I think it's so crucial to the work that I'm doing, but more broadly, how we can underpin better decision making in government and across the private sector as well.
Great. Thanks very much, Alexis. We'll just go over to Peter now from maybe a state and territory view. And maybe a start building on what Alexis has talked about, the collaborative nature of TERN, but maybe leading into your response, Peter. I mean, could you deliver some of the state and other larger national and international projects without collaborative research infrastructure?
Oh, that's pretty easy. No, I guess is the answer. It's pretty critical, really. I mean, at a number of levels. So field data across Queensland, across the country, drives a lot of our biophysical products. Things like the ABARES, STAR, cover transects, and TERN landscape, or TERN rangeland surveys. I guess the data from those is kind of critical in both the development and the validation of some of our key vegetation products. Similarly, the TLS and LiDAR products over some of the super sites perform the same task, I guess. They're really important for that sort of broader scale validation of, where the trees are, how high they are, what their density is. And sort of building on that is the biomass library. Once again, research infrastructure, but it's been really important in understanding both the biomass fluxes and changes in the landscape across the different plant functional types we've got, but also the errors associated with that. And actually having that as sort of being key to engagement internationally with groups such as JEDI and the CEOS biomass group. So it becomes collaborative, and it builds your research beyond the nation itself. So that's been really critical. And then there's some of the more sort of core remote sensing products. So products that I've had a bit to do with, like Veg Machine, for example, where it sort of accesses some of the TERN products off TERN research infrastructure, I guess. So, over the last few years, it's delivered over 70,000 time series drills accessing 8 million data subsets for users across the rangelands, looking at vegetation condition of their properties. Chopper, which is a little tool that people use to extract data sets. It was sort of done on a weekend, and it's currently delivered 38,000 files to a diverse set of users across industry, including insurance, carbon, regeneration groups, and others looking at land conditions. So I don't know what the end users are of these products. I can just see email addresses, but the products are getting out there and getting used by industry. And even now, sort of we're all working from home. Here we are on Zoom. And I had a query this morning from a state government user wanting to access some Sentinel-2 fractional cover. And they said, oh, the data's really big. I pointed them to TERN. I said, well, they're cloud optimized geotips. You can just plug QGIS in and do your weed research up in the Daintree without actually having to pull any of the data down, because you can actually just get it straight off the research infrastructure. So it's kind of critical, I guess, for all those reasons.
Right, thanks, Peter and Alexis. So I'm going to switch over to a question for everyone listening, but just while I do that, I guess for either of you to respond. TERN's research infrastructure, what's the role of science and research in government sort of applications development and industry? Is that an easy transition to make, linking science through? And is that a bigger discussion we've got to have at some point?
Alexis hasn't unmuted, so I'll jump in. Look, it's all about synthesis. I think we've discussed this for a long time, but I'm doing a project at the moment with Queensland Health, looking at environmental factors associated with farmer mental health, and as part of that, sort of had to rework some of the APIs through Veg Machine to pull in other data sets as well. So, you've got rainfall and temperature and a whole lot of other environmental data sets. And it's that sort of, how do you, I guess, operationalize tools that synthesize a lot of these data sets together so that you can enable, I guess, research of some, I don't want to call them harder problems, but just in different fields outside in the environmental space that we all kind of work.
Okay. Alexis?
Yeah, my comments are fairly similar to Peter's in that it's foundational for the work that it can then be done to apply all of the available information to a specific problem area without all of that underpinning information being accessible and being in formats or, as Peter mentioned, in infrastructure that allows easy access and the ability to synthesize that information together to provide new applied information. Our job would be very challenging to be able to apply that to any given problem area without that underpinning foundational infrastructure to do so.
Thanks, Alexis. Thanks, Peter. We'll just continue to move forward a bit. That sort of set the basis for how is infrastructure used at the moment, and how it fits together at a state and Commonwealth level. There's a question here that you can see in the presentation screen. While we go through the next section, if people want to have a think about what is government's role in research infrastructure, and I guess that's a very large sliding scale from none through to, well, they really need to support it because it underpins government activities and development of industry. I'll leave that open while I'm talking on the next one. So if people are able to type into the chat window at the moment, we'll look at these responses as we go along. Okay, so just a bit more context before the sort of second and final part of the discussion before questions. When we are looking at research infrastructure, why should we look at that in that bigger, longer sort of set of activities, from research or science through to use of infrastructure, government and industry? If we go back to the NCRIS sort of research infrastructure roadmap 4 years ago, you have a look at the role of research infrastructure. It is about linking research institutions with research universities and industry, and I think government probably should be in there as well. Maybe that was just something I'm thinking. And ideally, it's going to be used to deliver these outcomes for our future. You look at another figure there, we've got national research infrastructure in the centre. We've got some of the slightly older names for some of the centres, some of the facilities there. So we've got research infrastructure, bridging, institutional research infrastructure, and then going out, in this case, to ag research and applications. And somehow this magic circle does stuff in the middle. This is an area I think we need to think about a lot more carefully and invest a lot more time in at the research infrastructure level and research in general. So just back to our area, Earth observation. So in that last research infrastructure roadmap, it was one which was identified for capability and enhancement and building up. So we've continued to try and work in this area. Basically sensors, sensor networks, new and innovative products. And I think the other key point to note here is, yes, we're delivering products, but the changes in technology and data access, processing and delivery that Peter alluded to is we need to move away from products to delivering people models and algorithms that they use to deliver products that they need in place. Dealing with Earth observation and research infrastructure means trying to get across this space here, which I know looks complicated because it is complicated. This is that white space. Whoops, back in here. These are all the groups that are involved in collecting satellite imagery, processing and using it in one way or another. And you'll notice the space agencies now in the middle there, which is important. So, and the stipple in the middle there is where ideally infrastructure and research infrastructure sits. It plays a critical role in allowing these groups to work together, address problems, and when there's a workable solution, ideally it goes to government. If it doesn't go to government, is private industry going to take it up? And then, if it's not going anywhere, then it should stop or something else happens. So this is a challenging space to work across all those areas. Just before we get into the discussion, I do want to show one diagram. This is something that we've been using in the Earth Observation for Government network, and it represents this progression from research, development of science, testing it, getting it working, so research proven, getting it working operationally, which means different things to different people, and then working nationally or internationally. So that top row is going from research to operations. If you look at it from an engineering side, you've got these technical readiness levels, which are used to label things, and we've been involved in space applications lately, so we've tended to use these a bit more. I just want to look at that flow, which is research and research institutions, research to research proven, and I want to make the point that research infrastructure sits here and potentially into operational. But once we get into operational, we've got to move out of research infrastructure. So ideally, we should be moving in terms of developing our use of research infrastructure. Ideally, we want it linking into this larger process of going into industry and government and also back and forth. I'm not going to dwell on those things. Earth Observation for Government Network, we're starting to get it, building that linkage, and we're running workshops to link research through to government applications and involving industry in it as well. So it's an attempt to have that conversation linking across the top there. I'll skip through that. Just to show the outcomes of some of that work so far, we've had one workshop looking at land use and land cover, and it said, one of the outcomes were, here are some areas that we need to do research on land cover and land use. These are the products or services which are ready to go to an operational level so they can be pushed along. And we've done a similar thing for vegetation as well. It's not the be all and end all of these applications, but it's a start at having a better link across research to informing government and industry and science. It's not saying we're doing research just to support government or industry, but it's one of the key drivers. We have a space strategy where Earth observation is a national civil space priority. And so providing the research infrastructure to support the development and application of industry here is really important and critical. Right, I just wanted to turn back to Alexis and Peter in terms of looking forward a bit for the last 5-10 minutes, and Beryl, feel free to cut us off when you need to cut us off about things. In terms of looking forward, I just sort of tried to sketch a picture of linking from research to government and industry, getting things working. We've got a lot of technical changes. I mean, in a sense that there's now multiple very large scale online stores of Australian and global satellite data sets that are fully corrected and ready to use. They're next to large processing engines where people can process the data, and people can build sort of applications that do that sort of online and then just deliver. If you're a plantation forestry manager for your forest, you'll get a table telling you, okay, this month, your trees grew this much. We're now moving to that point of delivering end to end. What do we need in research infrastructure to keep our science being engaged and doing that and getting, Australian government and industry and our society further advanced? Just a small question. So I don't know who wants to go at that first. You're both on mute, so.
I can do it. I'm just mortified. Actually, I just deleted Ken Brooks' question in the Q&A. But anyway, if Ken's still listening, ask it again. Sorry about that, Ken. Look, I'll comment on this with an industry hat on, because I've just finished trying to, I guess, a project trying to make up some of this data a bit more readily available, and this was for the Meat and Livestock Association Beef Sustainability Report and Dashboard. And so as part of that, we basically pulled a whole lot of data from research infrastructure, so data on vegetation structure, cover, persistent green, historical clearing, soils, from the Soils and Landscape Grid, rainfall, land use, and demographics for every cadastre in Australia. And we pulled that off the research infrastructure and loaded into operational infrastructure, so in this case, Google BigQuery. And so that allowed our data scientists, I guess, to do sort of interactive data analysis, synthesis and modelling at pretty much at any temporal and spatial scale across the nation. Sort of can go back 30 years, looking at clearing, change in demographics at any sort of scale at all, and it all, you know, runs quickly in a dashboard kind of thing. And by exposing the information in that way, I think it really helped, I guess, build value on all the underlying data sets as well, because you can start to mix and model them together a lot more. And it enables users, you know, in this case industry, but it would work equally well in government and the science community to synthesize, you know, a lot of these data sets together much more easily than I think we can at the moment. So that'd be a quick comment at this stage. I don't think dashboards are the be all and end all of everything, but it's that synthesis of information, and in this case here it was pulling it all together, and I don't think you can do that on research infrastructure. It had to sort of run into commercial infrastructure to be able to actually handle the scale that we were running with here. I'm happy to be challenged on that though.
It's a really interesting question, Stuart, and I guess Peter's comment kind of indicates where it is going in some aspects. To me, it's about making sure that there is the information available to be able to start thinking about how you can synthesize it and bring it together into something that can give you that small piece of information that's required to support a particular policy area or a particular program or a particular decision. In this case, it was in private industry, the example Peter just gave, where users can come along and get the very small piece of information that they need to meet their particular requirements. And while that last piece might be something that you want to move into infrastructure that sits outside of the research area and is operational or commercial infrastructure, to be able to do that requires the development of the ideas, of the standards, the way that we think about how to access information, and the development of that underpinning foundational pool of data and infrastructure to be able to support that application to specific areas. So you can't get to those really pointy applications unless you have that broader underpinning structure to support that. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of where I see research infrastructure sitting, is really about providing that foundational base of continuing research and development that will support us to be able to use all of the data and information that is now available to us in specific areas.
Thanks, Alexis and Peter. I think just pulling that together, I mean, that the fundamental linkages that collaborative research infrastructure provides across our research institutions and to parts of our government agencies at state, territory, national level, you know, that looks like that's a key component that we need to keep this going. But, you know, we sort of need to pay maybe a bit more attention to communicating what's required there and how to keep it all going forwards in future. You know, ideally, we want to avoid the problems or challenges we see, you know, where we have, you know, critical environmental information and monitoring, which has been delivered through research infrastructure, where, you know, those funding programs are discontinued or someone moves on, and then the service stops. So, you know, hopefully these sort of conversations which get us to going, well, these activities are essential and need to continue, do need to be built up. So it is that communication moving forward is critical. There's so many things to cover there. Beryl, I'm just conscious that we've just gotten into the discussion time. Are we able to open it up to discussions based on comments that have come in the chat window?
Yes, Stuart, I think that now would be a good time to tackle some of the questions that have come in. They're scattered across both the chat and the Q&A session, and I see that we've managed to find Ken's question, Peter. So I'll start with that one, which is, can we demonstrate decision-making changes on farm using imagery? So if somebody on the panel would like to tackle that one.
Yeah, I just answered in the chat, actually. I said, no, we like to think we can. Yeah, I think it's really hard. I think it's really hard because we've got, and this is the group that could do it, but there's management is just so buried in a climate signal that is so complex across the landscape, and you've got all the underlying issues involved with soils and landforms and rainfall distribution and a very poor distribution of rainfall grids and everything else happening across the landscape. So to actually pick up that management signal, which is what we all want to do because the government really wants to be able to demonstrate the effects of investment, it's actually a really hard thing. So I'm going to say no to that, but I think we should give it a keep trying.
Okay, well, I'll move on to another question. Stuart, your comments about engagement with professional bodies was much approved of. And the question is, which professional bodies is TERN engaging with, and can we expand that within our group?
Yep. Thanks, Bill. I mean, that's a good question, and I might have to defer to you. I think there's a couple of levels of looking at that. There's professional bodies in the sense of, you know, things like the Ecological Society of Australia, you know, the Environment Institute of Australia and New Zealand, you know, Australian Meteorological and Oceanographic Society. There's a range of discipline-based societies which are, you know, of different scales and with different levels of government and industry impact. I mean, from an Earth Observation Australia point of view, the area we just talked about, there's now more extensive conversations. It's not formal as far as I know, but I think it's something that could be improved on. The challenge is there's a lot of different professional bodies versus discipline bodies, you know, things like the Academy of Sciences or Academy of Technical Sciences and Engineering, and, you know, others as well. So I guess, Beryl, I'd turn that one back to you in terms of is that a TERN board to engage at those levels, or is that a TERN communications and management one? And do you have a register of groups that you respond to?
Yeah, I will comment on that one, because when our advisory board held its strategic planning day in December, we grappled with the question of how to engage, and our decision was that TERN, you know, there are so many people TERN should be engaging with, so many bodies, that we should work through professional peak bodies as our conduit to the broader community. And so our communication group is at the moment working hard on its engagement plan, trying to identify all those. We'd love to hear from people, because it's, you know, we're a bit naive. We do need to build up that list of contacts and get doors open and things like that. So I agree totally with the sentiment. If I can just move on to the next question about suggesting best ways for us to find research gaps, and that we can perhaps go after with government grants, so that we're not just doing research for the sake of it. And this one comes from the Capricorn Conservation Council, which doesn't have very much funding.
That's a good question, and it is I think TERN and the other research infrastructure facilities are it's a balancing act in the sense that there's science priorities which are driven by, in a lot of cases, improving knowledge and understanding key questions. So those are often set in one area, whether it's national academies or groups working around areas. I mean, the OSFlux group's a good, I guess, example of a group that's working around a set of processes and understanding those, the science-based ones. But then you have, as soon as you step into government agencies, whether it's state and territory or government, they are going to be driven by legislation and what the political direction is at the time. As Alexis said, I think they need to be, they ideally are evidence-driven, and it should be science-based, so it's legally defensible. So that's another area, where they define them. And then I would also say that, industry on the other side, in the sense that, the government is looking after or monitoring and managing the environment, which is used by industry for a range of activities. So the industry is also, if you look at some of the peak bodies, whether it's in agriculture and horticulture, Peter mentioned in Livestock Australia, they all have a pretty good idea of what is the information they need now that would either improve the sustainability of what they're doing, it would improve their productivity and efficiency, it would enable them to do new things. So in terms of looking for research directions, there's some industry ones, there's definitely some government ones, and it's different for different departments. And Alexis might want to comment on this from a Commonwealth agency. I mean, agriculture, water and environment how is there a plan there that defines gaps and needs? Like, how does that work?
No, and that's been really challenging, but that's actually one of the key outcomes that we're trying to achieve through the Earth observation for government network group, for example, is the ability to be able to articulate what those requirements are that are going to feed into specific areas within government. So one of the outcomes we're looking for there is bringing together all of the different levels of government to try and understand whether there are overlapping needs at different jurisdictional levels that currently are an information gap within government, and articulate those in a way that means that the research community is able to look at those challenges and see whether there's something that can be put forward to address those. So I think it is a gap at the moment in terms of how we articulate what would be required to be able to more effectively support government, but it is one that we are trying to tackle, and the idea of that is to try and make sure that if there is an opportunity to be able to do something that is able to feed into bridging some of those gaps that we have in information, people are aware that exists. So I think there is a gap, but there is also work being done to address that.
Can I make it?
Alexis, go on, Stuart.
Sorry, Beryl. It was just, I think, one of the aspects we've noticed working in this area, across the last 10 years is those interactions that have worked across science, research, government and industry seem to have come from areas where people have spent time to understand how each of those different components or communities work. I mean, Alexis's department works in a different way and different time frames and mechanisms to environment and science, where Peter works at a state level, you know, the funding cycle within universities, and then industry, depending on whether you're small or large, works differently. Getting a shared understanding of what works in each of those seems to have been a key of putting together research, and research infrastructure often offers that space where people can go, well, this is how I work, and timeframes, and how do we put things together as well. So I think that's a really important one, building on what Alexis said there.
And I think that leads in well to the next question, which is about the feedback loop of how the data is used by industry, and then does the operation of the industry impact the data that the research originally collected. So really, you know, government collects knowledge through development conditions on development impact on species, but how does that feed back into groups like TERN's records that are being used by other concurrent industry projects, where the developments reduce species numbers? It's a great challenge for you all.
I'll jump in here again, if that's okay. Yeah, it is a huge challenge, is how to effectively leverage all of the data that gets collected across industry, across the research sector, and across government, so that you're feeding into a single repository of information. And that's one of the key reasons that we're trying to develop better standards for data exchange. That's kind of crucial. And also work with all of the other parties, including industry, to apply open and transparent standards and licensing and access to all of the data that gets collected to support environmental assessment. So it's part of our new program of work to look at digital environmental assessment. But more broadly, it's part of our direction that we're heading in to try and look at how we can facilitate that information exchange and that collection of information into a single in an abstract way, a federated system of repositories. That means that all of the information that gets collected is able to be integrated and synthesised and used across all of the different sectors. So you're not limited to the information that's being collected for research purposes or for government purposes or within industry. And I think that addresses the feedback loop. It's not so much a feedback loop as exposing the whole loop or exposing the whole system and making it transparent and able to be integrated across all of the different stakeholders who are involved in the collection and use of environmental information.
Beryl, can I maybe try to dig into that a little bit more? I think one of the things, like our area is delivering these maps or products that people look at, and it's rare that they're 100% accurate. There's always something wrong with them in one way or another, and that's just the nature of working in this area. That feedback loop is a critical process of how we work, and I think through collaborative research infrastructure, we are starting to see more processes where, as an example for land use and land cover mapping, a product goes out and a particular, a group of growers that grow a specific crop are given, here's our initial mapping, here's an app where you can look at it on your phone, and basically, can you go and check it? And, if something's wrong with it, take a photo, submit the information. It gets them into the process of looking at the data and going, okay, it's not 100% right. I can tell them where it's wrong and we can try and build it. So there's the opportunity to do that. And that communication process, particularly if you're working across like a whole of industry group, in this case it was with some horticulture growing groups, you're able to actually communicate, look, this isn't a perfect process. We are doing R&D, and in this case it was with government, and it will go back and forth. And if you're part of that, you know, it helps the whole process. So you get that feedback loop. And that was just one example of one product. You could potentially do this for a range of other products. And it also helps us approach the problem of people going, well, I don't want Big Brother spying on us, and you know, your maps are only 75% accurate, it's all crap. It starts people to get engaged in that discussion and, you know, get ownership as well. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to give you probably this one for Peter and Alexis more than maybe Stuart, but there's something about government for them. It's the tension. How do we manage the tension between evolving research data and the often static data used in policy? It's really actually from the perspective of research infrastructure, but 30 seconds, you've got each.
Mention yeah. Look, I think policy is getting better at using real-time data. I think is the answer to that, particularly around vegetation management, water management, environmental management. I think there's a lot of near real-time data that's going in there. It's a matter of getting it from the research stage into the products that are used by policy as quickly as possible, and building the pathways that can do that to be the most efficient that they can be.
So for my 30 seconds, I'll say that I agree that we are getting better at using real-time data and being able to access information on an as-needed basis rather than some of the slower ways that it's been used in the past. At the same time, there's good reasons for particular information to be included as part of legislation, and if that's the case, then we do need to make sure that we continue to access the information that's been put into law as part of a particular program area or policy area. So in that regard, it means that sometimes we do need to keep using something that might not be cutting edge, or it might not be necessarily what you would use if you were starting to do the same thing again now. And I think we're getting better at not hard coding those sorts of things into legislation. But if that's the case, then managing that tension is just, to me, I think communicating that that's the case, that there is some reason that we need to continue to use something that may not be the most current way of producing that particular piece of information. And it's for a reason, and it's because we need to be able to continue to report in the same way, using the same method on a particular area. And in that case, it kind of moves away from that research space into just being an operational stream of information that is used by government for a particular purpose. So I think there's tension because people feel that we should be always using the best available information, but sometimes the best available information isn't necessarily the most recent and what would be considered the best available information in the research community. It's the continuity of information that is more important in some contexts. So in that case, we will need to make sure that we have that available for those particular areas.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we've reached the end of our time, and I want to thank all of the panelists, Stuart, Peter, Alexis. It's been really great having state government experience from Peter, coupled with Commonwealth experience from Alexis, and brought together with Stuart's vast experience of working across academia, industry, and government. That's been fabulous. And I find it very difficult not being able to see our audience, but I just want to make sure that you're all aware that you can contact TERN if you've got any further questions, and that we have our next webinar on the 2nd of September when we're going to be talking about using TERN flux and satellite-derived data to improve evapotranspiration and ground cover modelling. And that draws upon our TERN supersite research infrastructure. So that will be presented by Will Edwards from JCU and Joe Owens from University of Southern Queensland. So thank you for being a wonderful audience and sending all those really ticklish questions. And thank you once again to the panelists, and we wish you goodbye. Thank you.